Damn, what is up, my internet friends? Welcome to Walking and Talking, the show where I walk and talk. For those of you who might be new to this series, just a brief introduction. I'm just going to be walking and talking for 4 hours, unless my battery runs out before then, but hopefully it won't. I don't have any pre-planned subject matter. I just have kind of a process where I'm speaking reflexively, you could say. I'll be speaking a lot about speaking itself and about making the video and about relating to you. And I suppose the reason that I keep doing this, despite any clear point of doing it, is that quite often over the course of an episode, something happens where the boundaries of myself seem to disappear. The apparent boundaries of myself seem to disappear, or at least relax, and there's some kind of awareness going on that we could characterize as transpersonal. And I hope that any viewers who are able to pay attention long enough maybe come along and have a similar type of experience. Although I'm recognizing that I'm kind of talking about this in a goal-oriented manner. Which is kind of a normal way to talk about things. That is, I would say that language in general is very tied into utility. I think, in general. And that I'm speaking about walking and talking right now from the perspective of a pretty conventional type of thinking, in which there is such a thing as utility and a goal, and something that could be transcended. You know, speaking as if there's a reason to be doing this, even though ultimately it could also be said that there's not any reason at all, and that I just do this, and that you're just listening. It's probably the better way to talk about it, although there's no really correct way to talk about what I'm doing. Which is why I just keep talking, because it tends to be that everything that I say while I'm doing this needs some amending. It can't get to total correctness, you know? But I'm kind of starting off by sort of attempting to summarize what's going on here, even though I think that I know that it can't really be summarized, or at least maybe I am hanging on to an idea of what's going on here that I think can't be summarized. What's going on here could be interpreted already as me clinging to a specific idea. Whoa, there's a big spider on the camera. You can't see it. Okay, spider removed. What could be happening is that I'm actually clinging on to an idea of something ineffable and making some kind of claims up front that there's something ineffable going on, or promising that something ineffable will happen. Even though I don't really know that to be the case, and in fact, it's a little paradoxical in that anytime that we do actually experience the things that I'm talking about, it's not like I actually have any control over this, or you have any control over this, or like ability to summon some particular type of experience out of willpower, you know, or from an idea. However, I can also say that the process of doing this, my conglomerated memory of making walking and talking videos, there is a very high there's a high level of instance of what could be called an altered mind state occurring. A perspective that seems much more likely to happen when I make these videos than when I don't make these videos, and when I just exist in normal life, so to speak. And so within that memory, there is enough to compel me to keep coming out here and making these videos. Now I have to backtrack and qualify a little bit of what I said, because when I said that there's a high instance of an altered mind state going on, I think that that's a little bit of an illusory representation. It's a little bit of a misrepresentation of what actually happens and what I'm interested in happening. What I'm interested in experiencing, you could say. Because it's not exactly about specific mind states. A mind state is something that I can describe within temporality, you know, a temporary state that occurs and then goes away. And from an ordinarily linear temporal standpoint, it's fair to describe it that way. Like from outside walking and talking, that would be a fair assessment, I think. But from the inside, it's something much harder to define. Like if we actually start to look at the here and now and try to define what's happening right here. And as I said that, something about my approach shifted a little bit. Something about my orientation to this moment and towards you, the listener, shifted a little bit. In that now I think that I'm a little bit more focused on what we would call the here and now. And hopefully a little less dependent on more overarching conceptions and narratives of what's going on. And that's a good feeling to me. Like there's just, right now there's just a little hint of what I could describe as some kind of opening some kind of like some increased permeability of thinking, and in that is, I guess I would say, simultaneous with a heightened sensitivity to experience, in the sense of perception and of thought. And also, I could say that I'm experiencing more openness, you could say, with respect to the meanings of the words that I'm saying. As in, I'm becoming a little more awake to not only just the multiple interpretations that are possible of each word that I'm using, but also starting to become a little bit more cognizant of the process of meaning, or of what meaning is, as I am appearing to make it, to make meaning out of the words that I'm saying. But strangely enough, I could describe what's going on almost equally as well, or with equal applicability to my experience. I could say that meaning is escaping, or maybe even more accurately, that I feel like I'm starting to escape meaning in what I'm saying. As in, it's beginning to feel as if what I'm saying is maybe less referential, or you could say that it's becoming kind of more recursively referential, or self-referential, to the extent to which it's like a little bit more destabilizing or destabilized. As in, and maybe It feels concurrent with what I could describe as the passage of time since I began this video. As clear reference points in time, for example, the beginning of this video, start to recede into, recede away in my memory, as does a lot of the sort of web of reference points that make up any meaning also starts to kind of recede back into my memory. As in, like I could, like the specific situation of where and how I am, as in I'm walking on a trail in the woods, and it's been some time since I've encountered a human, and I'm kind of removed from the familiar reference points of my life and of my identity and all the things that sort of hold my identity together, which I'm thinking of as kind of like this web of interrelated reference points, thoughts, if you will. Then the meaning, like the core of the meaning that is tied into language feels as if it is kind of receding, but what's left is this mechanism of language, this continuous talking, and which is heavily tied into the linguistic mode of thinking. It's continuing to go in a situation in which it doesn't have very much to kind of bite into. It doesn't have reference points existing, tangibly in the real world in this moment. You know what I mean? I mean, it potentially could if I were describing my surroundings in detail and naming things and kind of marrying my linguistic activity here with more closely with my sensory input. But in the absence of that, I'm just kind of continuing here in abstraction and kind of allowing my thought process to mostly just reference itself, to build upon itself in what could be described as these layers of abstraction. Or kind of in depth, just verbally describing this process of verbal description of nothing but the verbal mode. I mean, not solely just the verbal mode. I'm also referencing some of the things that I'm saying could be said to be already exhibiting a philosophical bias, or perhaps an unquestioned philosophical assumption about what constitutes things like meaning and what constitutes the self. As in, I seem to be attesting to a conception of selfhood that is conceived of as an interconnected web of thought or of concepts that doesn't have an inherent solidity to itself, but is only kind of a web of relation. And I would say that my experience now seems from my viewpoint to be confirming that conception of what selfhood is. Because it's beginning to feel more like this linguistic thought process is kind of going on by itself without really implicating a solid center. Now, am I really experiencing that, or is this just kind of a rephrasing of an already held belief? But there's already sort of a paradox in how I'd phrase that question, in that it's not exactly true that that's an experience that I can have. That is, it's oxymoronic to kind of say that I can experience the absence of self. You know what I mean? But I can say that and I guess I'm starting to use I, and I'm starting to say I with like at least some degree of skepticism, but I'm not going to revert just yet to any kind of language that goes out of its way to avoid the first person pronoun, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm not going to just yet start saying, like, what is being experienced or whatever, if I'm not, convinced of that being the truest way to speak. Anyhow, I think that I am recognizing the articulation of previously held ideas that I think of as external in origin. I mean, that I know to be external in origin, because I can even recall specific people or reading similar types of things or hearing similar types of things being said. which kind of casts out the possibility of, these ideas being expressed from a solid self here, or like having an origin point that has inherent independence. It's a little more accurate just to kind of say that there's communication happening here. You know what I mean? Without trying to necessarily attribute what is being communicated to any, independent entity. I don't think it could exactly be done. But there's communication happening nonetheless. Just in that to whatever degree that there's any kind of understanding occurring here. I.e., you understanding what I'm saying. But I'm trying to hone in on like what is the relevant phenomena to describe here. I'm trying to communicate what is the most kind of pertinent thing to communicate here. And one thing that occurred to me just now is this experience of, you could frame this negatively as like imposter syndrome, if you've ever heard of that. Like the feeling that what I am doing is not authentic. Or like in this moment, this kind of feeling of waking up a bit, and like the memory of what I just said, or the sort of lingering linguistic thought content that's attached to the recent past of what I'm saying, becomes recognized or witnessed or observed by an aspect of myself that doesn't feel identified with it. Even now, I would say. But I don't want to frame this as a negative experience at all. It feels actually refreshing. I'm going to try as best I can to kind of like hone in not only on what it is that I'm talking about, but how should I say it? I mean, in a sense also like be it or something like that. How should I say that I feel this desire to kind of dig through modes of thinking that I experience as conditioned or as that I experience as familiar, to get to something that actually feels, for lack of a better word, more alive and more kind of on the edge of creativity, or on the edge of what I consider to be the kind of creative edge of reality, which I would also say would be like synonymous with the present moment, even though I also consider the idea of the present moment to be fallacious. In the sense that if you actually look for the present moment, you can't even find it. But you can't find the past or the future either. A lot of thoughts are kind of coming up, but I keep recognizing them as being, what should I say, like already familiar concepts about reality, I could say, about time and about identity. Or to be a putz about it, to say like the ontology of reality. Just, you know, saying like a fancy way to say, trying to figure out what's really real, and having this desire to like really know that, really know experientially what's real, as opposed to this more like apparently static reliance on linguistic concepts. Even though I also have this suspicion that whatever does kind of lie between the cracks of these linguistic concepts of what is real is just emptiness, or a better way to say like unknowingness or unreality or something. But again, like even this feels, I keep seeing this as being already another concept, and feeling the imposter syndrome again, as I keep kind of recognizing the absence of knowing. But I keep coming up, I keep kind of like recognizing like apparent knowledge as just kind of standing in for knowledge. Another way to say that would be like language cutting up and fragmenting reality in a way that's like that's like more obscuring than like actually seeing or something, or making reality. How's it going?
How you doing?
Good. Is it wet up there?
Oh yeah, the whole trail.
Probably wet everywhere, huh?
Yeah, be careful. Yeah, it's slippery when you get feet.
Thanks. I was saying like I'm experiencing this linguistic thought process as being something that is chopping up and representing reality to me. And having this suspicion that it's actually nothing that is at the basis of it all. And I can remember this experience. Well, I can relate this experience quite strongly to reading about reality. It's kind of a pretty funny activity now that I think about it. Like reading like philosophical and physical theories of everything, theories of reality. Reality theory, there's even a term for it. Reading about it, looking for some kind of understanding of what reality is via language, and continuing to feel frustrated in that it's feeling like all of these linguistic conceptions of what reality is, ontology and all of that, is merely just kind of like a fragmentation of reality, like in the linguistic modeling of it, like the modeling of it in my mind as affected by things that I read or hear. Like, is the actual like kind of fragmentation of reality. And maybe it could be said that when I walk and talk, it's like to kind of push this linguistic mode, like hopefully beyond its usual function, or an attempt at investigating what's at the root of all this language. What is the actual thing that the language is modeling? What is the actual thing that we're always modeling in our mind? But so far, it seems as if I'm continuing to like fragment. You know what I mean? Like it feels like an ongoing fragmented experience. I mean, and surely you must be experiencing this with me if you're listening to everything that I'm saying. I wonder if you have this, like, I wonder if you felt any of this frustration while listening to me, and a desire to say to me something like, I don't know, something like, you'll never understand, or if you just stopped talking, that would be more, that would be a realer experience of what reality is. To drop off linguistic thought. But there's also sensory perception going on. But then I'm also wondering, like, to what extent, like, sensory perception is mediated and attenuated, I guess you could say, by other cognitive processes that are kind of very, very tied in with language. You know what I mean? Like is it possible for me to actually perceive something like a rock without that tying into a concept of a rock, and without this linguistic concept of a rock? Like, is there such a thing as, like, pure perception without any further conceptualization of that which is perceived? You know what I mean? And I actually tend to think no. That there isn't. That I tend to think that even perception itself is a kind of conceptually dependent on conceptions of self and other. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have the concept of self and the concept of other in order to have the concept of perception. Pardon me, I'm going to take a whiz and I'm just going to leave the camera on. So we'll have a little break. And I'm going to drink a little water here. Now, in the spirit of trying to just, stick to my protocol and describe my experience, there's a way that I could generalize how I conceive of the up till now duration of this video as feeling in some way like I'm striving towards something. I'm trying to get somewhere that I feel that I'm not. while simultaneously having the thought that I shouldn't be striving towards something, that having this concurrent thought that if I were somehow able to actually accept exactly where and how I am right now, that this striving feeling could go away. And I would then have a much clearer understanding of reality. That is, there's a paradoxical thing happening here where I seem to want to experientially understand reality, and that desire puts me in a seeking state, and the seeking state even extends to the seeking to not be seeking. Although I can say that emotionally, I don't feel any high degree of disequilibrium. You know what I mean? I'm not very upset or anything. There's like I could maybe at times imagine myself becoming more frustrated, but I'm also in those times not afraid of becoming frustrated. As in, I'm thinking, you know, as I experience this striving thing that we could call like an intellectual type of striving, or maybe even in some kind of meditative type of striving, or parameditation, or something like that. Somebody introduced me to that term. That I could imagine that kind of increasing in intensity towards an actual emotionally frustrated state, but I'm simultaneously not afraid of that happening, because like I can remember that happening plenty of times before, and it's knowing that it's transitory, and it even has this other side to it after you get through, that where I'm granted the opposite of that, like a tranquility and clear feeling, having gone through some emotional turmoil. And so it's like I'm not afraid of experiencing some kind of emotional turmoil, or like even like a physiologically involved type of striving, or even to the point of pain or suffering even. But maybe it's like the lack of fear of that is also probably contributing to the relative stability of my emotional state. The relative stability of my emotional state seems at this point to maybe be contributing towards a smoothness or ability to continue speaking and letting this thought process play out with not too much concern, not too much worry about how it's going. Like I could say, like in this kind of segment of time that I can mentally demarcate by being the segment of time in which I'm squatting in front of the camera after having peed, as opposed to being behind the camera. This is like a marker of time that I could point to in here. Maybe that's cheating a little to allow myself these time markers, rather than like maybe a more rigorous way to do this would be not to take any kind of physical rest like this, to keep as many of the parameters constant throughout the 4 hours as possible, so as to let the variability and the transitoriness of everything else be more clearly witnessed. You know what I mean? Like when you do the same routine as rigidly as and repetitively as possible, with as much consistency as possible, you can more acutely discern the variations in everything else, which happens to be like your state, your own subjective state, or whatever changes might be present in this, so-called external state of things. Anyhow, I think that I just left many unresolved tangents in that train of thought, and so that there's some backtracking needed. But before I backtrack to any things, I just want to remark now that I'm beginning to have this almost surprised feeling, this, or even excited, a more excited orientation to what's going on right now, which, weirdly enough, is completely contiguous with the opposite of that excitement, with the opposite of that sense of discovery. That is, I started to describe, and you might remember this from just a few minutes ago, I started to describe the striving feeling, which, is to a certain degree, a disequilibrious feeling, a feeling of disequilibrium, something that is seeking completion. Me feeling like a limitation. Me feeling like a limited individual that is trying to find wholeness. And that kind of manifesting as this striving to experientially understand what reality is, and of course, by extension, what I am in relation to reality, what I and reality are, and also kind of by extension, like what you are, like what the nature of you is, and wanting that experience for you. And so just like kind of continuing on that train of thought, like just continuing to describe that experience, which is, completely within the bounds of my protocol here, which is just to keep walking and talking and in a reflexive manner, continuously describing my experience. I could say that there was a transition into a way of experiencing time and experiencing thinking and experiencing speaking that felt more frictionless. Like it was just kind of happening, and there was like no emotional striving, and it's interesting to I'm just kind of realizing now, like I'm remembering describing I'm remembering describing a relative absence of emotional disequilibrium despite my experience of striving, this experience of not knowing enough, not being enough, not experiencing reality comprehensively enough, not knowing reality comprehensively enough. And through the process of describing that, we could say that there was a transition to a state that was emotionally feeling even less disequilibrious. But as I say that, like even kind of like more emotionally stable. Seemingly. But as I say that, I'm also recognizing that it's, in a sense, untrue, in that, first of all, it could also be just as accurately described as no transition at all, which is actually something that I was trying to express, the contiguity between what I'm experiencing now in its fullness and what I am remembering of my experience previously. It's like they are different and the same. I mean, I think that's exactly it. That they are precisely different and totally the same. And it's bringing to mind. It's bringing up this like question of what difference and sameness actually mean, and now it's in kind of an exciting way. It's reminding me of something that I was reading recently, which is like the concept of syndiphonesis. Syndiphonesis, a really fancy sounding word that I think was coined by Chris Langan. And I was reading Chris Langan's CTMU, which stands for the Cognitive Theoretical Model of the Universe. But please just forgive me for a moment for starting to speak referentially. But, you know, it's just kind of coming up in kind of an exciting way, or an interesting way at least. Syndiphonesis, meaning that difference and sameness are kind of the same, or that sameness implicates difference and difference implicates sameness. Now, like, that sounds kind of paradoxical, right? But it's like, if there is a difference that can be recognized, let's say from one thing to another, or from one concept to another, then that implies that those two different things reside in a fundamentally, that they are two manifestations of a substrate that is fundamentally the same. So, I mean, I know that, like, maybe that sounds like far-fetched. I mean, so like some examples would be like, I mean, like maybe take some kind of like low bar example, like, you know, we have like a fern, and we have I don't know what this plant is. A fern, and we have some moss. Okay, bad example. What do we have here? A hemlock tree, and I think a birch. And so there's definitely a difference that I can recognize, and the difference speaks to them having a sameness, which is that they are trees or that they are plants. But like, it's actually, I think syndiphonesis means something actually much more fundamental. In that, like, what if we took the things that seem like the most different, like, the most possible different things, like, let's say, like, this boulder and compounding interest rates, or something, something totally abstract, like this boulder and communism, like, just like not seeming to not exist even in like any same like category of existence, you know what I mean? But so like, apparently very real difference can be discerned there. But like something that indicates, and this may sound like super obvious or like almost tautologically obvious, which is fine. From reading Langen, we know that like tautologies can actually be powerful. The difference that can be observed kind of indicates that both of these things have something very fundamental in common, that they are in fact two manifestations of a substrate which is essentially the same. And like in this case, I want to say that the most fundamental category or substrate or whatever that, communism and a boulder are both a part of is that they both appear to exist. They both can be observed. They both can be experienced. They both exist in experience. Or like, to put it in a more, to actually put it in a more ontologically, epistemically ambiguous phrasing, what was the word that Langen used? That they are both like, they are both kind of like consist of like cognition and substance. And like I say cognition and substance just to kind of like point towards the kind of like two major poles of like how you could think of reality ontologically, whether you think reality is essentially cognitive and subjective, as in like mind creates world, or whether you think that reality is fundamentally noumenal and material, and it exists fundamentally as material before cognition. Like either way, kind of either way you want to think of the ontology of the rock and communism, that they both exist in that substrate. Like that's kind of like to the extent that they can even be said to exist, like there's maybe an argument to be said that like one could say that one might argue that the rock has a more fundamental existence than communism, because one would say that the rock has a more noumenal existence, that is like it has existence without and preceding any human naming it, whereas communism is highly conceptual and only exists as kind of like an emergent human-made concept. However, I would counter that they are actually on equal footing, in that the rock only exists as such in relation to human perception and conceptualization and cognition. You know what I mean? I mean, like, if you're thinking that the rock exists as such, independent of human, you are thinking within a certain framework where that is not quite recognizing is unconsciously anthropocentric, and that you're not recognizing how much role you, the human, and your perception and cognition play into the, you know, so-called existence of the rock as such. It's like without our categorizing and perceiving, it's like I don't think that the rock has actual distinction from anything else, and is only just kind of like is like recedes into undifferentiated existence. Like it doesn't have inherent existence apart from being observed. You know what I mean? I mean, and this kind of like gets towards like tree falling in the woods type of koan. But like I find for me, like even just like you can get to that sort of dissolving the dichotomy, like through just kind of reasoning, like what we're doing here, just kind of like going on and letting your own like thought processes just follow each other. Just like you just like don't rest on something that's an incomplete conception. If you do just keep going, I find that like these types of dichotomies always what's the word, like resolve each other, or not exactly resolve each other, but the dichotomy becomes transparent, and you can start to recognize the unity between the apparent dichotomous facets of something. And so like that's why like I'm blanking on the word that Langen was using for like the sort of like base substance of reality, but it was a great word because it's implying like a kind of joint, like both material and cognition, like objective and subjectivity. Somebody else used the word transjectivity, like transjectivity being the resolved dichotomy between subjectivity and objectivity, and I really loved that. It might have been John Vervaeke, or maybe it was Bernardo Kastrup. I was listening to them debate each other, and one of them introduced this term, which I love because it seems like that's a more that's like kind of like a higher level way to start thinking about reality. Like we can start to use language like this to start to be able to investigate language above the Cartesian dualism. Now I feel as if I've left several unfinished branches on this trail of thought, that any one of which could lead towards another kind of endless but productive, if you will, investigation. And so maybe I can go back and start to wrap up some of those loose ends if I can remember them. However, maybe to just kind of like check back in with the basic protocol of continuing to describe my experience as I experience it. It's pretty interesting. Like I could point to sort of like a phenomenon that seems to be a type of retroactive meaning making. That is, if in the beginning of this video, like my subjective experience was one of feeling, we could say like a mild frustration at the limitations of my own understanding and the strong desire to have a more comprehensive understanding and to discover it via this process of walking and talking. It's like already I feel as if even that state is being retroactively made sense of in the present, you can say. I mean, and of course I'm using all of these terms with a grain of salt. You know, think like terms like the past and the present, because like, well, we'll address that later, but for the sake of speaking now, we'll continue to like have this dichotomous like relationship between the present and the past, and perhaps the future as well. That like my memory of this like inquiring state feels perfectly in line with any would-be actuality of actual understanding of reality, if you know what I mean. Let me try to put that in another way. That the striving and feeling of incompleteness is, in fact, a part of the completeness, even retroactively. And in this, I think that there's actually like a positive message here, which is to say that, you know, which is like, if in your life you may be experiencing some difficulty, or you're experiencing a lack of meaning, or a not knowing what you're doing with your life, what your purpose here is, if you're experiencing the frustrating unknowing of what you really are and what reality is and what is your place in and what's your relationship to reality. And, you know, I think that what I'm describing can be extended to encompass a lot of our frustration, even if it may be kind of like veiled. And you know, maybe what I'm describing, this like this apparent lack of meaning, is something that lies beneath a lot of other problems, a lot of, you know, that it's like maybe what's beneath, and like a causal factor, if you will, or an underlying factor in like a lot of the problems that we have today, and which, you know, I think that it could be thought of that way in a lot of situations. The positive message is that I'm saying that that experience of lacking that meaning is an inherent, inextricable component of whatever meaning that there is and that you may or will experience. Maybe as I just worded it, that doesn't sound that positive. But I can say that when I am experiencing something that I would categorize as meaningful, and which I'm saying this with an asterisk because I'm thinking of meaningful now as being like a relative type of word. That meaning includes and kind of like absorbs and absolves the lack of meaning retroactively. So it's just kind of like saying, like, I know that I know from experience that at times life can feel really shitty and meaningless, and it can seem at times as if that is kind of the nature of life, that it can seem at times as though all life is like an unending train of shitty, meaningless hardships and striving for and striving. And it can kind of like, if that's what it feels like, it can kind of feel like that's eternal, or like that's going to keep being the case. But I'm kind of saying that that's not the eternal case. That's not. I'm saying that with a fair bit of conviction here that that just can't actually last forever. That type of experience is almost by definition transitory. It's like by definition unstable, because it is a profoundly disequilibrious state. And I kind of equate that state with the unpleasant side of individuation. That is the feeling of isolation, of being an individual who's cut off from the rest of reality and just kind of alone and up against the world. And with mortality, who an individual who's ultimately going to die and suffer in life, and experience all these problems that are in ways kind of like extensions of death, that is, problems of survival, problems of like social proliferation of one's identity, of the problems of the integrity of one's body and health. These are all kind of like extensions of the problem of mortality, which is itself, by extension, the problem of individuation. And like this is kind of like what I'm here equating with like the struggle for meaning, the struggle to feel like one belongs in reality at all, or even if you want to get bigger than that, like the like the experience that like reality makes any sense, or like there's any good reason for anything to exist at all. Look at this spring. This is beautiful. Wow, I would definitely drink this water right here. If I didn't already have a couple bottles of spring water. Wow, I'll have to fill up here or somewhere else, because it's like we're following a couple days of very heavy rain here, and so there's just a lot of water flowing out of these mountains. And oh, there's I think a frog in there. I don't know, just like this is, you know, a spring, you know? It's like how gorgeous a metaphor like could you hope for beyond this, of like, you know, it's like we live in a society where it always feels like this zero-sum thing where we're competing with each other for resources and power and domination, and then like it feels like every single life process that you need to perform like contributes to waste and resource extraction and you know, debasing the material substrate on that which we all depend on to survive. But then like you come to a place like this and you see a spring, like a natural spring like this, where it's just like, you know, delicious drinkable water just like comes out continuously, and like there's no downside to like, say, me taking a drink. I mean, like, I know that this is I'm speaking purely as a metaphor here and not as like necessarily like some totally scalable practical solution to all of our problems, because of course, like, you know, the springs can be over exploited and whatnot. But this kind of ties, this sort of ties into what I want to say, which is just that these negative experiences in kind of in all their variation and all their complexity and all their depth and all their scope and expanse, you know, whether it's manifesting for you as like some very specific shitty situation in your life, something that you wish were different, or whether that kind of like whether that that negativity is like kind of like expands to you in a philosophical or apologies, the camera turned off by itself for a moment, but all this like kind of like negative aspect of experience, I just want to reassure you that it has its positive side. It always has its positive aspect, as in like another kind of way to put it is that, you know, when you find this some kind of lack of meaning, or you perceive a problem, whether you perceive that problem like to be internal to yourself or external in the world, you can kind of look at the positive value that such problems implicate. That you know, if you see something upsetting, perhaps it is because there's something beautiful or good or true that is being destroyed or desecrated or exploited or ignored or whatever. And so you can not only use that as a marker to as a sign point towards what is that value that you want to be upheld in yourself and in the world. What is that beautiful or true or good thing that you want to exist and to prosper? And then you look at your own agency to move in that direction, because it's always there. And when I say your own agency, I'm talking about something that is independent of the argument of whether there's free will or not. So I'm someone who, like, philosophically does not believe in such a thing as free will. Like, if you actually introspect and look for it, you will come up empty-handed. I can pretty much guarantee, and if you don't, you're missing something, I think. But however, there is still something that I'm referring to as your agency that is real and important nonetheless, and is in fact, I would say, synonymous with your consciousness, synonymous with your individuation, synonymous with the specific particular person that you are in the world, and is also importantly synonymous with the present moment. I think of all of these things as synonymous, actually. And now come to think of it, I think I had kind of come to this idea in the past, and then I also heard this articulated. I think it was by this guy named Forrest Whitaker. I could be mistaking his last name. It's possible, but asserting that essentially time is synonymous with choice, which is synonymous with consciousness. And it's possible that I am kind of making a mistake, and it's possible that those weren't the exact vocabulary words that he used. But let's just look at that, because all of these things, I think, implicate each other in them, if you look at it. And it's a little hard for me to articulate, but I'm going to try, because I think it's a really beautiful thing, and a really important thing to just look at and recognize. Like maybe let's start with the experience of time. It feels like time is moving in a direction, right? From past to future, and that we are kind of experiencing it as individuals in that direction, and the future seems to differ from the past. I would say most notably in that we seem to be able to control have at least some influence over what happens in the future versus what happened in the past. It's a very obvious thing to say. We cannot change the past, but we can change to some degree the future. We can at least, change the realm of experience that lies within our selfhood. It's and that's almost I feel like that's almost how selfhood could be defined is the realm of experience that we seem to have some control over and could influence in the future. We could make different in the future, you know, by the choices that we make in the present. Whoa. Some large bug on me, I think, or I don't. Maybe it was just actually a wet leaf or something. I mean, let's try looking at it a different way. Like, what would any of these things be if you remove any of these three things: time, choice, and consciousness? If you removed one of them, like if you removed time, like the experience of time moving and like moving, like, you know, direction with the direction through time, what would consciousness be if there weren't time? And what would choice mean? So I'm just using the word choice like as kind of like synonymous as another word for what I was referring to as agency a few minutes ago, something independent of free will. It doesn't have anything to do with free will exactly. And like consciousness, like think of this as in a very fundamental sense of just like that there is something that it's like to be, that there is subjective experience, like that you can experience anything, that there is anything at all to experience or to be experienced. Like to me, if you removed time, then like the concepts of consciousness, of cognition, of subjectivity, like as well as the concept of choice or agency, they just become totally incoherent, meaningless concepts. They lose any meaning without time. And I may be at a lack of words for how to exactly describe that, but maybe that would be a good thing for you to just like think about for a minute. Like, or if you wanted, you could even pause this and just kind of think about these three things and what their relationship to each other, because I am suggesting that they are actually synonymous. I'm looking at a very beautiful mushroom right here. I've identified this one before. I'm not remembering what it is. But you know, here's like a little. I'm focusing on a little environmental detail here at the moment, while giving you a chance to kind of like contemplate time, consciousness, and choice. So, you know, what would consciousness be without choice, without this? And like we could think of choice as being like just the potentiality for difference, for something that is unknown to come into being, for something that is not to come into existence, to become. You could almost think of it as like contingency or something, or like, you know, that's kind of like what the future is. Like, or really like what the present is this nexus point at which the unknown becomes known, or something comes into being. Like, you know, it's like, what is the future? It is not. The future is something that is currently not. But what is the present? The present is what is, to the extent that anything is, to the extent that being has any meaning to it. Then the present is kind of the temporal classification we would give to that which is. And so it's like without that nexus, without that possibility of something to come into being, like the present becomes a totally incoherent, meaningless idea. Do you catch my drift? And then like with consciousness, which is like, just this fact that there seems to be something, there seems to exist something, even if all that something turns out to be is the experience of something, that even if we consider the only thing to exist to be experience, whatever you feel about the ontology of reality, whether you think of it as material or you think of it as mental, or to use the aforementioned term, if you think of it to be transjective, which is my leaning, that would actually be also a meaningless, incoherent idea without choice, without this connection between the unknown and the known, this nexus point. You know what I mean? I feel like perception, even perception, is something that's inherently entangled with the notion of choice, with this this constant becoming. And maybe you're not making the connection, maybe it's not totally clear how I'm wording these things. What's the connection between choice and the constant becoming? It's like, let's say, if there were just no connection between what's known and what becomes, what happens in reality, what happens in time, if we're just 100% random and unknowable, 100% unpredictable, there just would not be any degree of coherence to grant something such as a consciousness or experience. You know what I mean? Whoa. Did you hear that? My phone just out of the blue just said no worries. I thought I had, silenced it. But it's totally appropriate that my phone just totally randomly should just say no worries. And with nothing to account for it, there's nothing on my screen that would indicate any reason for my phone to do that. In some ways, I feel like kind of like converging on these three kind of synonymous concepts is, in a way, feels like so central. To me, it feels like kind of a powerful, parsimonious, device for thinking about reality, in a way that for me feels transformative. And for me, like, kind of gets to the heart of what I would call meaning in life. Or like, what life is exactly. I don't mean life as in any kind of like biological description thereof or definition thereof, but life in the fundamental sense of experiencing, of individuation. But maybe to backtrack a little bit and talk some more about, I guess, what I posited as a dichotomy between a lack of meaning and meaning. And what I was kind of phrasing as, I think, a positive message, or like, for me, if there's any positive message, then it's this. That like that experience of the lack of meaning like is precisely itself another like perfect expression of like what I take to be reality in itself and at large, and what I take to be the meaning of reality at large, which these are becoming meaningless distinctions at this point, as in I will propose now that reality at large and the meaning of reality at large are synonymous themselves. That like reality determines its own meaning. That its meaning is itself. Like reality is its own meaning. And that even this like struggling or striving or suffering is another manifestation of reality itself and the meaning of reality. Like meaninglessness is a facet of meaning. It is like maybe that's the best way I've come up with to express it so far. They're like, if you were, you know, if you were kind of like experiencing this like struggling, like in a way, or suffering, and I do not mean to like denigrate any specific forms of suffering, because I know that, and it's not to imply that like your suffering is like your fault. It's not to it's not to belittle like the just like inevitable and very pointless seeming suffering that goes on in the world. And, you know, to degrees that I cannot even begin to imagine, really. I can't begin to, or that, I mean, maybe I can begin to imagine, but I can't attest to really knowing the degrees of suffering that happen on large scales and on regular basis in the world, and that seem to be attributable to such preventable things. So, I mean, yeah, something that's like really sad and upsetting to think about. But and so, like, you know, in light of all that, I think it's like it's even more important to let that suffering like be the signpost towards the possibility of something better, of something different, of a world that is not yet coming into being. Like the recognition of the pointlessness of forms of suffering. The other side of that, the other facet of that pointlessness, is the pointer towards how it could be, how the pointer towards the opposite of that miserable situation. And to let it be the pointer, like, you know, for you as an individual, let it point towards your choice, like where you can do something in your relationship with the world that brings into being something with less suffering. Hello.
Hi. You alright?
So slippery, huh? And so, in a way, like, I guess what I'm saying now isn't exactly optimistic in the sense that I'm saying, like, things will just get better without your agency, without you doing anything. But it's what I'm saying is that, like, to put it in kind of a blunt way, it's like you doing something to make things better, like, is kind of synonymous with meaning. And I guess I'm kind of saying, like, is synonymous with the meaning of reality at large. It's like it is the process of becoming. Like, your individuation, your individuality, which kind of like implies this agency, implies this choice that you have, that you have choice, you know. Like, you know, by definition, by being an individual with consciousness, with cognition, who experiences time, that is like that is one side of like what we could, I don't know, what I could call like the merging with reality at large, the merging with meaning at large, found in relation to the world, found by relating to the world. It's like what's kind of called for as an orientation towards the world that decreases suffering, and that which I could also phrase that as being synonymous with maximizing choice for other conscious beings. I mean, it's maybe, I guess this is maybe starting to sound kind of resonant with the sort of ethical implications of a Buddhist line of thought, and that's fine. But I'm feeling like this could be arrived at really through any means. Like, you could arrive at this orientation towards reality, this understanding of reality, I think, really through any you know, unflinching introspection or outrospection, or you know, extended and true process of thinking. I mean, it might start to sound kind of grandiose to posit it as like what I'm describing to be something of a telos of reality. That, like, the telos, if there exists one, is like, has an inherently ethical side to it. That ontology of reality and ethics are inextricable from one another. That clear understanding of reality, like, necessitates a clear understanding of ethics, and vice versa. I think that if you took any true line of inquiry from either direction, from an ontological investigation or an ethical inquiry, you could wind up at the same place. And but also for me, I find that it's also one and the same with just the search for happiness, the search for like even something as basic as like satisfaction in life. It's inextricable with like understanding of reality and an ethical orientation. That like happiness for me is synonymous with those, understanding and morality. Nice, look at all this wood nettle. That's nice to see. Like a huge patch of a very like health conferring plant. Always a nice thing to see. I think that when I experience something like beauty in nature, and maybe to try and define beauty in nature, like the kind of like the rich experience of complexity in perception of materials that lack any human origin, and I mean that maybe biologically, maybe have something to do with biology, but then also not, like, you know, geologic formations, to perceive such rich complexity, like to actually like experience pleasure in the perception of material that is not even biological in origin. For me, I think this can kind of point towards This can kind of be a sort of evidence for transjectivity, if you will. As in, like it begs the question, like when you see something that's like that inspires total awe in you, like total grandeur and like the experience of the sublime, in witnessing something that's totally outside the realm of human intention in its existence. Then I to me, I think that strongly suggests a linkage between subjectivity and the objective world, as in like the idea that objectivity and subjectivity co-create each other. I'm not sure if you maybe that's not totally clearly articulated, but maybe you can follow. Like I mean, why is this experience so strong? I mean, maybe it's like that there's like something like a recognition occurring that would not be expected, you know, that I wouldn't be able to predict the depth of the feeling of recognition sometimes when experiencing something in nature. It doesn't even have to necessarily be in like capital N nature. It could be like learning about something in cosmology or science, or even in the human-made realm or something like that. You experience this recognition that you couldn't have predicted. And it's like the question is like, is the world in like just somehow like inherently beautiful before we come to perceive it? Was it already this complex just by itself with no one to perceive it? Or is there some aspect of our subjectivity, of our perception, that is responsible for the beauty? And to me, it's like, I don't think that either one of those arguments like really stands up independent of the other, but that like the truth lies in the merging of those two interpretations, i.e. transjectivity. just to get back here towards describing my experience, and I have to say that it's becoming increasingly characterized by gratitude and awe, and like a feeling of humbleness. I mean, I don't know if I'm like, you know, not that I'm expressing myself humbly necessarily, but that my subjective experience is that of being humbled by even like I don't know, like just this experience in itself, everything that entails, the like good feeling of meaning coming from this process of communicating with you. And I mean, in a way, I mean you specifically, in that like I can refer to you without any equivocation, and know that you are understanding what I'm saying, at least to a certain degree, or like at least to some degree our experiences are linked via this communication. And there's like a very strong good feeling of that comes from that. Like having something to do with that in this particular circumstance and framework, I'm able to talk about what I really want to talk about, what really feels meaningful to talk about to me. Somewhat isolated and protected from sort of like the normal sociality, which is, you know, it's normal sociality is fine too, and it's also absolutely another expression of anything that I'm talking about here. But then there's like what happens here, or what is happening here. Feels like it's doing that thing that I was talking about earlier, of kind of like retroactively like resolving some meaning for what I'm referring to as past experiences, even though I'm kind of like, wow, that's I'm looking at a very beautiful piece of birch bark that, once again, this is this experience of like perceiving order in nature, perceiving these patterns, and like that experience of beauty is maybe the definition of this experience of beauty, is like this one of recognition between like my very specific individual human, I mean not necessarily my individual, but like the recognition between my human way of perceiving and the matter that is perceived, and this evidence, this strong evidence that the two are not totally independent of one another, and that feeling like a good thing. I mean, or at least like, you know, having a positive experience of that. Ooh, what do we have here? Now I'm kind of like, it feels kind of like strangely appropriate that I'm like now at this very scenic vista atop this mountain peak, where there's this opening where I can look way down below and I can see really far. All of a sudden there's this opening from being able to just see the trees to being able to see the forest. And it's really, really a wonderful experience. Like I'm just, I'm a little bit at a lack for words. Maybe that's even a liability of walking and talking in a beautiful place like this, that I may just sometimes be dumbfounded by things that I see, rather than steadfastly bounded within my introspective process, thinking process. And there's a very unfamiliar animal sound going on. I don't know if you can hear this. I think it's a bird sound. But there's pretty much as much awe contained within that weird sound as could be contained in anything that I'm saying. I'm just gonna have a drink of water. So I know, yeah, for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this, I'm hoping to try and, just describe everything that like I'm hoping for anything important to be accessible via just the audio stream, so that you're not really missing anything that's key. So I'm just having some water here at this high point, and we're also about midway through this episode, so we can we're metaphorically and literally at the top of the mountain, and we can go back down in just a moment. There's a chipmunk. So just enjoy the silence for a little bit and know that it's as meaningful as anything that I could say. There's this chipmunk walking around here that seems not to mind my presence at all. Seems to, it's keeping an eye on me, but it's coming relatively close to me, just about 6 feet, 4 feet away. I mean, it's cute, but that word is like, it's insufficient to describe the experience. Because the experience is more of like a deep tranquility engendered by the recognition of myself in the other. I simply can't recommend to you highly enough some kind of activity that's just like long, where you focus your attention for a long time. And when I say focus your attention, I mean something kind of synonymous with restricting your activity. Like putting some kind of boundaries on your activity for a period of time that is challenging for you, that may be difficult for you to do. But, you set yourself a framework, and the framework is really what gets you what gets you through some of that difficulty, and you get to the other side of that difficulty and you experience something really good. Like, a kind of like obvious example of these is like meditation retreats where, you go somewhere, or maybe you can, I know you can do these remotely via Zoom or whatever now during pandemic times. I know those exist, where there's even a social structure in place where you have other people doing the same thing, and you have somebody administering the structure. And look at this chipmunk. What are you eating? Is that an almond? Did some hiker leave an almond right there? That was a good score. Damn. Wish I had an almond. You know, you have a group of people doing this thing, and there's always some kind of conceptual / philosophical framework around what you are doing when you are meditating, when you're sitting on the cushion. And so I'm not making any argument that like any particular meditation practice like reveals to you something, anything like objective truth. If anything, it's like reveals to you like subjective truth. Whatever that even means. You know, this is just kind of like a caveat that I'm saying, like, no meditation practice as defined as such is like epistemically neutral, but nonetheless, like, they are to varying degrees these structured frameworks that help you do something that might be challenging to you, that at the end of it would like reveal a higher level of perspective on yourself and of reality than you would otherwise get. And so they can be really helpful. I think I can reveal that I've done a lot of that sort of thing in the past. But you could consider what I'm doing now, these videos, as kind of like creating my own structural framework to do a thing for a challengingly long amount of time. Although I'll admit, like, it's maybe becoming less challenging, and that's fine. Although it still gets challenging. Sometimes I fail, you know. Sometimes I will come out to make a walking and talking episode, and I can't continue. Like, I come up against some kind of internal blockage, and I stop making the video, and I come back another day and try again. Like, and in this case, it's like a durational type of communicating. And I really love it. Honestly. So this is all kind of to say that, like, I hope that to some extent, like, the act of listening to this can be, in some respect, a structural framework for you that could be, you know, in some way rewarding or some way helpful or useful or instructive or something or anything. Wow. There's this chipmunk eating another nut. How are you... Did these hikers really leave behind that many nuts? There's a lot of pistachio shells there. I don't know what this chipmunk is eating now. It's gotta be. It's happy, though. It is chowing down. Man, I look forward to that experience myself. This is the epitome of cuteness right now. Watching this chipmunk munch. He sees me. He doesn't seem to mind. So I'm hoping that, the duration and limitations of this content is in a way useful to you in a way that I think is like I don't really see anybody else doing quite this thing, so I'm just hoping that this has some meaningful value in existing in the world. I mean, for anybody. I mean, if it's even if it's only for you, then I'm happy. Or even if it's only for me, then I'm happy. But it is kind of inherently communicative. It's like you are, in a weird way, have a role in this that is just as essential as my role. The fact that you are listening, like, gives this meaning for me. But then, like, look, another almond. What are these almonds doing here? But yeah, beyond this content being like specifically like a useful structure for you or a useful whatever, or I mean, the word useful isn't necessarily strict here. I also wonder if it can be instructive in a higher order way of like suggesting to engage in this, to just suggest in general of like engaging in this structured type of experience for yourself, like and either seeking out a framework that already exists and is compatible with you, and or creating your own. This chipmunk is unbelievably cute. What's up, buddy? If I had some food for you, I would give it to you. Next time. I'll bring you some nuts or some cheesecake or something. Something you never had before. A hoagie. You want a hoagie? You probably won't feel so good afterwards. So I never want to stir up FOMO or envy of my experience. I mean, it's probably fair to say that in some objective measure that this is an extraordinarily beautiful setting that I'm in, that, you know, I'd probably have to be pretty dense to not have any awe inspired in me from it. But I still believe that, like, the core of this experience has to do with the structure of it, the structuring of it. Like what's the more intrinsic and important aspect of this experience is is granting it its meaning, is the framework, you know, the conceptual framework that I will repeatedly do these 4-hour walks in which I talk continuously. And, but like paradoxically enough, it's like that's a structure that on its surface seems like one of the most meaningless things, one of the most pointless things that I could ever engage in, or that I could, you know, structure part of my life around to some degree. It sounds insane from a certain perspective, that I'm talking endlessly by myself about nothing pre-planned, you know, totally unscripted. Like, what I say is unstructured, unplanned. I don't edit it. It's like, you know, I kind of see it as, in a lot of respects, going right against any of the notions of value that the dominant society holds. I'm not offering you easy, practical solutions to anything, or like knowledge in the traditional sense, or information in the traditional sense. Or stimulation or entertainment. It's like I'm not making something that's in a form that is very recognizable as content or a service that would have an exchange value, you know? It's not on the surface very recognizable as something of value that one would pay money for. But my understanding of this is at least an attempt at a higher order type of conception of value, you know? Like a higher order type of understanding. And I hope for it to, you know, and like in a kind of like realm where that's in a kind of realm that's, you know, lends itself towards the opposite, that lends itself towards very fragmented attention and therefore fragmented types of thinking and materialistic in the sort of like separating sense of like, there went one of those big birds. A pheasant? Maybe? Like I'm continuously like kind of like issuing to you a challenge to engage in what might in apparent pointlessness or in order to kind of like witness meaning coming into being in real time, witness meaning emerging out of the meaninglessness, and contiguous with it, no less, which I think is like a more... to me, it's like a powerful type of understanding, and one that's like, to me, I think more adaptable in the world. Like, it's not like, I'm not giving you like, you know, like specific strategies for life, not specific strategies, but like these more generalizing higher order orientations towards truth and meaning that I would hope have kind of a precipitating effect into the particularities of your individuality and your situation, your life situation in the world. That's what I hope. And I experienced that myself. It's like, you know, I'm walking metaphorically up the mountain into abstraction of thought. And kind of leaving, I don't know, or distancing myself temporarily from the common reference points that language usually depends on, and that meaning making and identification and individuation typically depend on, to uphold the notion of the individual with a meaningful existence. Like kind of temporarily distancing myself from that mode of being, climbing up the ladder of abstraction into these like very kind of generalized or relatively all-encompassing perspectives of on reality. Which, you know, it's giving me this like this strong experience of like of tranquility that feels not I mean, I want to say that it's like it doesn't feel very dependent on much, this experience. It's not dependent on drugs or like sex or any you know, like kind of like material derived pleasure. I mean, of course, it's like, if you want to draw all the connections, it's like, of course, like the ability to do this is like dependent on everything extrapolating out into all of existence. That's true. You know, the truth of dependent arising. But it's like it has, this experience has like an added, like to me, sort of like an added degree of embeddedness with the rest of life by virtue of it just simply arising from this activity that I can do, you know, just this walking and talking. And just by virtue of like repeating an activity for a length of time. And I don't think it's like I also don't think it's dependent, you know, on this specific activity. It's like there's any number of practices that one could adopt or create for oneself that, if kind of adhered to with some amount of consistency, would yield the same type of results. So what I'm saying is like it is I want to say that like the ability to find meaning is always within your reach. It's always within your own agency. Like like that you have choice is that you have choice is like inarguable. That because it is intrinsically the same as you existing as an individual. Now, I'm not like, this is not to try and say anything about your specific situation, because it's like true that if looked at in the kind of like material like world viewpoint, it's like certainly some people have like much more restricted freedom than others. Like there's for sure like discrepancy in between degrees of freedom that people have. But this is something that is, I think, different from this fundamental quality of choice that I'm saying is kind of like synonymous with being and with consciousness and with the experience of time. Like that you always have, that choice like exists even within the most restricted freedoms. Like even if, it's like being imprisoned. It's a terrible thing to have one's like liberties drastically restricted by another, by the world, by society, by whatever. As one example, it's a terrible thing, but like even with that, I just want to say that there's no diminishment of the existence of your choice, which I'm kind of equating this with your humanity and with your sentience. Like that's something that can never be taken away from you. I mean, other than like, I guess like killing in a sense. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it can be but the fact that we are communicating, the fact that you are hearing this indicates that you are an alive, sentient being, and that this choice, this agency, this consciousness is there. Whatever the situation, whatever situations exist that you can't control, whatever parameters of your situation are uncontrollable, that's not you. You are the agency. You are the choice. And so, go into that. Lean into whatever type of choice maximizes choice for yourself and for others. It's like however favorable or unfavorable your scenario. To really kind of like realize your agency to the highest degree. And I don't mean agency in any sense of like power over. My conception of like maximizing agency is like not for the individual, but it is actually synonymous with like the individual relating to the world in a merging type of orientation. And that's like where the ethical orientation comes from. Like, which is like another way of saying that is like, in my understanding of reality, like maximizing the agency that you are, is synonymous with being as ethical as you could possibly be. Because maybe the way that I'm speaking at this point is like, maybe not necessarily like completely like empirically and logically linked as the way I have been speaking earlier, and so maybe it's a little bit more like propositional, or to be, for you to inquire, whether it's true. But in my current conception of things, it's like the agency that you are is identical with the agency that the world is, that reality is, the ongoing creation of reality, the continuous becoming of reality is synonymous with your so-called individual agency. And that ethics has to do with merging those. I mean, not that they like are really separate, but it's like the merging in practice. And like if that ever kind of sounds like if it sounds like I might be advocating for any type of like martyrdom or sacrifice, then that's a misunderstanding. Because like my conception of ethics is also synonymous with like being as happy as I possibly can, and that means like a happiness that has like a depth to it, and an unshakable embeddedness in reality. So if there's a form of happiness that I get that I know to be dependent on something that decreases another's happiness or decreases another's agency, that is not in alignment with the respect for all agency and sentience that exists, then that happiness becomes shallow to me and in effect becomes not very happy. It's like a weak, dependent type of happiness. Like, any pleasure that I can get out of like hurting someone or something else. Any pleasure that I can get that that I know is dependent on some kind of harm being done. Like the knowledge of that, like, destroys its effect for me. It to whatever extent it's dependent, it's like not satisfying to me. It's like more and more, what makes me actually happy is the type of activity that I can, it's like the degree to which I know that the activity is beneficial to other people and other, conscious beings, or like consciousness at large. It's like the idea of individual happiness in a way like starts to become a less coherent idea. And like, it's like we might argue that about the validity of the word happiness in this instance, because like maybe meaning, what I'm actually talking about is meaning. But I don't want to imply that there's like this trade-off between happiness and meaning. I don't want to imply that it's necessary to sacrifice one's happiness in order to like benefit others. I'm actually implying that that they are ultimately the same. That like, if you have a dependent, shallow type of happiness that is dependent on something harmful, or something that's just like, is just very dependent on whatever it is, that it's necessarily like only a reflection of what true happiness is. It's only like a shallow, flat picture. It's only an image of what real happiness is. And that I think that it could potentially be a signpost. I mean, anything can be, I think, a signpost towards like happiness in the deepest sense. Which I think always goes above what we think of as the individual. Goes beyond what we think of as the individual. It's like somebody also, this reminds me of like what we think of as the deeply positive emotions, which, I'll describe here as like happiness, tranquility, joy, meaning. It's like those aren't so much like standalone inherent emotions as they are like the open sky. Those are like descriptors of openness. They are descriptors of the transcendence of individuation. Like the deeply positive emotions are not so much like discrete emotions as they are descriptions of the merging with reality. Where like if you're saying you feel deep joy, it's always due to like a merging type of experience, a relaxation of the constricting borders of individuality. Like what are the things that we get the deepest joy of, like, and it's always it's always in relation to an other, right? Like deep meaning, like does it ever come from like getting something for the individual? I don't think so. I think it's always actually has more to do about giving and about permeability with the rest of reality, other people, or reality at large. Whereas the inverse, like the negative emotions, the like, I don't know, the sadness and anger, I don't know, I guess I don't want to denigrate them too much, but whereas we can think of this other category of emotions that are kind of attributable to individuation and that are kind of like attributes of the limited experience of individuation, where one is unhappy because of where one is unhappy in a way that's always attributable to the experience of separateness from the rest of reality. Like one's not getting what one wants. One feels threatened. Like feels one's integrity threatened. Or just, experiences a form of separation. And so these are like more like the clouds in the sky as opposed to the open sky itself. Like the negative emotions can be thought of as that which impedes our experience of connection with the whole, that which impairs the experience of unity, loneliness. Jealousy and whatnot. Feelings of inadequacy. Now this is like, again, I want to add this disclaimer that I don't mean to like characterize negative emotions as being like inherently fallacious, and I don't want to denigrate them as being like in any way like self-caused or always like, the fault of the experiencer. But I hope that this actually implies a positive orientation, a positive message that the negative emotions, negative experience, suffering, is a cloud in the sky, and that the sky is the oneness and is the positive experiences, the meaningfulness, and it is all-encompassing. whereas the clouds are transitory. The clouds exist within the medium of the sky. But the sky is, in fact, boundless. So in a way, this is kind of saying that suffering is bounded, but the oneness, which is kind of pointed to by these words like joy and meaning, the unity that is pointed to by experiences of joy, is unbounded. It's unbounded by temporality because it is atemporal. It's unbounded by the individual. It's unaffected by mortality because it is something that transcends the individual. It's unbounded by it's unaffected by the transitory manifestations of like, you know, the many. It's not tied to like any particular manifestation of the whole. It's not because it is the whole. It's not limited to any particular manifestation of it. Whereas the negative, the clouds in the sky, are in fact limited to a transitory and particular manifestation, an individuated manifestation of the whole. Maybe another way of thinking about it is that the suffering and the pointless suffering that exists it's like the link between the suffering and like the meaningfulness of reality, that is like how you kind of resolve why suffering would exist in reality, you know? Like if reality is meaningful, and I'm saying that kind of by definition, reality and meaning are coincident. Hello. Gets slippery up there. Yeah, I'm saying that, like, I mean, we can kind of investigate this proposition later. That I'm saying that reality and meaning are inextricable from each other. That they're, if one kind of like examines their definition thoroughly, they can be found to be the same. And so, like, but then this question of like, why then is there all the suffering and the pain and the separation and whatnot? And I guess one way to think about it would be that the resolution of the pain and suffering with meaning and with reality, like, lies exactly in your agency. It lies exactly in your being and your, like, that you can choose to do something. That there's always, like, no matter what the constrictures of your situation, no matter what the confinements, what the restrictions to your situation, that in fact those strictures, those restrictions, precisely define where your agency lies, where your choice lies. Because your choice lies within the constrictions, and that choice is the link. It is itself the resolution between suffering and meaning. Like where, like exactly what you can do in the world. Like whatever it is that you are best able to do. To, like, you know, reduce suffering is one way to put it, but like to maximize choice for yourself and for others and for the world at large. Like that precisely is the resolution. And it's not, I mean, I don't mean resolution by like you find it and then it's done. I mean in that it's a living, ongoing resolution. Like the world is ongoingly resolving itself by your participation in it. Like you cannot discover the meaning in a purely objective way. You cannot discover and understand the meaning of reality in a purely objective way. It's always involving your subjectivity, your participation in reality. It has to. Like I would almost go so far to say the meaning of reality is like your affirmative participation in it. And so, like, yeah, it's like, it kind of, in a way, it kind of like moots this question of like asking, like, why is the world so fucked up? I mean, of course, we're gonna always be asking that. Like, why are people doing so much fucked up shit, like, and creating so much suffering? But I think, like, I mean, and you can, come to various, like, propositional, relative limited answers to that, like explanatory answers for certain situations, for limited scopes of reality. But, like, if you're going to find an answer that involves real meaning, then it's going to ultimately reside in your own action. And just action, I mean, like, not even necessarily like physical action, but like, I mean, let's actually not make a distinction between physical and mental action, because it's, I think, pointless here. But yeah, by action I mean the same thing about, I mean the same thing as participation and agency. How you relate. I'm kind of saying that I'm essentially rewording the same thing over and over again, I think. Like, feel free to turn it off if you want, but we're getting close to the end, which is, could be thought of as an achievement. I certainly commend your endurance. I'm incredibly grateful that you're listening right now. But it's not a type of gratitude that means like that anything hinges upon you continuing to listen. You may very well have better things to do. There may even be better things to do that are even hinted at by what I'm saying. So, like, just to kind of say that you're not necessarily missing anything when you're not, continuously listening to these things, but to the extent that these continue to be useful to you, then by all means, keep listening. But I don't think there's a whole lot of like specific implications from what I'm saying. As in, I'm not really specifically implying any particular type of action, because that's completely and wholly dependent on the specificity of your situation. Like, who you are, not being totally separate from your situation in the world. And, action and relation arising from that individuation. It's like, it's wonderful, I want to say, that I mean, that's not so articulate. What I'm trying to say is that the experience of separateness, like, I mean, and I've probably said this a million times. You've probably heard this in a million different ways from many other people. It's that the separateness, the individuation, the feeling of separation, like, is really just as sacred a manifestation of unity as anything else, and it just is this side of what I'm talking about with participation and agency. It's like the separation side is like, I don't know, you could call it, if you want, like the motivating factor, the part that will kick you in the pants, and make you feel like shit if you're in a deep sense, if you're not correctly oriented, or but this is all just like, this is all kind of complicated by the language that we have. Like I do think that, like, there could be more appropriate words sort of invented, maybe, I don't know, like transjectivity. Or that like individuation is like a facet of the connection with everything. Individuation being one side of a dichotomy with unity, and the connecting, the bridge between those two is like positive action in the world. Anyhow, I've, gone some time without speaking, and so I'll return to the task at hand. I'll stick with my protocol here, continuing to report on experience. And it's kind of like there's kind of a symmetry going on. I'm going back down the mountain physically, and I feel to, like, in some regard, like re-individuating, as in the fluidity and openness experienced in the middle of this thing, kind of like rearranging itself and maybe to some extent like concretizing. Into what, I don't know, what kind of seems in conglomeration and in interrelation to be relatively solidly experienced values or conceptions of self, while at the same time kind of understanding the emptiness of these things. But I mean total emptiness. But kind of, being fine with their sort of like simultaneous, like non-existence, but like appearance, Being fine with the appearance of things like ideas, concepts. Identifying characteristics. Sense of identity. And so, I mean, what I'm describing, like, kind of hints at a transition, but as before, a transition also implies a sameness. Like, in one sense, nothing has changed. In the sense that everything is always change, that's still the same. Or that it's like, I don't know, in one sense you could say that you and I as individuals never have and never will and currently don't exist. That no individual ever manifested, really. Or that, no individual like actually manifests. It's like there's an appearance of an appearance of an appearance. I mean, I'm apologies if that's not self-evident, or if that comes a little bit presupposed or something. And then there's this other sense where, you know, in a kind of mundane sense, like we're still just individuals. Not saying anything really here. Not really any, you know, not saying anything meaningful actually here. Because it's kind of like, I kind of feel like anything that I'm saying that's true is kind of tautological, as in it's like saying that it is what it is, essentially. And then, like, everything that I have kind of been talking about is, in a sense, like the grand tautology. But the thing is that your subjectivity, your experience, your being, like everything that you could possibly think of as you in the most fundamental sense, is very crucially implicated within this tautology. Am I still on the trail? Or have I wandered off? I appear to still be on the trail. So we get now into like the kind of total, like not total, but like relatively banal type of experience where it's like I don't feel as if I have anything else to say, and it's like I'm just kind of in, you know, this is just kind of like normal life. Like, in the sense that I'm starting to get hungry, I'm looking forward to eating, and seeing people and talking to them and relating to other people. Where it's like my mind starts to turn away towards, I don't know, it starts to turn away towards like the, I guess like what I would think of as the less relevant types of thinking, like less universal, but like at the same time it's totally universal. The experience of getting hungry. I mean, what's more universal to human experience than that? Food. Eat here now. So yeah, I mean, it's like, it's almost like I'm almost sorry to be like, okay, we've come down the mountain now, and we're just like headed back towards the vicissitude of life. But you know, I'm ready for it. You know what I mean? Like now it's like the vicissitude of life is like the food now. I mean, grist for the mill, you could say, but...
That's awesome. I'm glad.
Whoa! Did you hear that? What the fuck? My phone just told me, that's awesome. I'm glad. What the hell is going on with this thing? This is trippy. Google something. Google Assistant or something keeps springing up as the ghost in the machine, hearing things that I'm saying and then responding to them. What the fuck is going on? It's hilarious. Yeah, not just grist for the mill, but it's like everything for the mill. It's like the food itself is like, you know, life. Or something like that. It doesn't matter anymore. I mean, not that it doesn't matter, it's just that, you know, you're here at this point where it's like, I'm towards the end of my 4-hour framework, and you can probably feel my attention starting to like wane and drift, and my penchant for saying profoundly high-minded abstract things is giving way towards the, you know, my more like individual situational circumstances of like getting hungry and you know, thinking about these practicalities, starting to think about money, you know, all these all the banal profanities of the world start to barge in. But we don't complain about that. We just, you know, eat them up. No belly aching. I mean, you can bellyache if you want. you just go and do life. With gusto. Or something, or whatever it is you want. Anyhow, speaking of the vicissitudes and practicalities of life stuff, I'm in the process of transferring walking and talking into an audio podcast format, which means I will be uploading all the previous episodes in audio format to a podcast host, so that you can listen to just the audio in any way that you listen to podcasts. It should be available through all the common apps for that. And then all the subsequent episodes I will be uploading in both video format to YouTube and audio format to the podcast. And so it is a little bit of more work, but I hope that way that, like, I have actually been thinking more and more that just listening to the audio is, in a way, a more flexible format, and maybe in some ways a more healthy way to interact with this, in that it does give you a greater degree of freedom to do stuff when you're not, looking at the screen trying to, see anything that happens in the screen. Like there's not even, if you're just listening to the audio, there's no screen there where you're constantly wondering if something might be happening on screen. And with that in mind, I'm now more so speaking with just an audio audience in mind, as in, like, I'm trying to I'm trying not to, like, make any of the important stuff of the episode be hinge on something that's only visual. You know what I'm saying? So, like, if there's some visual detail that I deem to be important, then I'm describing it verbally so that you're not missing anything. You're not missing any of the meaning if you're listening to the audio. Because I like this way of interacting with thought, listening to audio. So I can put it on headphones or a speaker or whatever, and I can move my body around and I can do stuff. I could exercise, I could drive somewhere, I could do dishes or whatever. I can do all kinds of things. There's many activities that can be done while successfully listening to speech. And so I'm trying to make that more accessible. Also, in the realm of practicalities, I will, despite my dispensation against ever asking for this sort of thing, I am attempting more and more to try and turn this into my job, or I should say, like, to try and to try and put this in the most realist terms. It's like I'm trying to get myself to do this as much as possible, and with the highest quality possible, which I mean, I don't know. It involves like everything from the production quality and the technicalities and the gear therein, and time put into crafting the video and audio into a least annoying possible like way to listen, which I mean means like mastering and stuff and recording at a relatively high quality, and but also like the time. Whoa. Not only the time like spent actively making the videos and uploading them, but also like in researching and reading and all the kind of like extra work that goes into kind of like into the pot, like that there is a bit of like process of like ingesting a lot of like thought to kind of like make a rich brew that can kind of catalyze when I do these. I mean, I don't know if that's like inherently necessary. It could be actually, I mean, I think that actual walking and talking itself is like the most crucial thing. But anyhow, this is why I'm like I do run a Patreon site that's associated with this, and I get so far I get like a very small amount of money monthly through there. But this is just to say that like literally like every little dollar that I get through Patreon is enormously helpful, not only pragmatically but also just like motivationally to keep doing these things on a more and more regular basis, because I mean, of course I love doing these and I want to do them regardless of making any money off of them, but having some income from that source is just really helpful to be able to carve out the time. So do or don't. I'm happy that you listen regardless, but if you want to chip in $1 or $2 a month, or $1 or $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 or $1 million or whatever, it's immensely appreciated. And it's like, I don't know how much I can articulate how that sort of like support like folds into the meat of this substance in a way, like, it's like, well, it's like taking what it is like taking care of the practicalities of life to like allow for the existence of this sort of thing. But otherwise I'll do it until I'm like probably totally broke. But hopefully that won't happen. Anyhow, enough of that spiel. But I had to say it. I mean, I didn't have to say it. I wanted to say it. I want your money. That's not true. What I really want is to keep doing this. And with that, with that spiel, I shall exit this in a state of hideous discomposure. I'm just kidding, not really. I am somewhat filled with discomposure when I mention the Patreon thing, but I at the same time I think that I shouldn't be. But anyhow, I'll leave it up to you to decide. And yeah, in all seriousness, I thank you so much for listening. It's amazing. I can't believe it. I can't believe you made it through. I hope it's, yeah, I really hope it's valuable for you. Okay, enough of this. Until next time. Bye.